or responds with a full temper tantrum, it is always about that other person, not about, like, it wasn't Mark. He didn't do anything. And if someone is so small that you can't articulate your point without throwing a temper tantrum or insulting another person, I'm happy that Mark showed both sides. That, yes, I'm an intellectual, but don't give stuff in the studio, you know? And I think it's important for people to see that, yes, you can still be an intellectual and demand your respect. That doesn't make you...
Joe Budden is spiraling fast after some familiar media faces dropped what looks like a full-blown hit piece aimed straight at his podcast reputation. This whole mess kicked off just a few days ago when things between his co-hosts, Mark Lamont Hill and Queen's Flip, exploded live on air, almost turning into a real fight. Now here's where it gets wild. Friends of Mark Lamont Hill, the ones who see him as a so-called bourgeoisie intellectual, are furious. And look, Mark might be educated and sharp, but he's also street smart enough to stand on his own. Still, there's a side of hip-hop media, especially within certain black media circles, that carries this "we're better than everyone else" energy. They're the TV anchors, political analysts, and talk show voices who look down on independent creators. These people believe Mark represents their group, the polished, media-savvy elite. So when they saw him arguing on Joe's show, they took it as a betrayal. They said he was being provoked and dragged out of character, claiming Joe's crew pushed him too far. And now they're calling Joe Budden's entire platform anti-intellectual, labeling it a cesspool of chaos.
Listen, depending on how bad the cramps are, I might listen to his ass. Well,
I'm sorry, when you're desperate, you're desperate. But I hear that so often that people are like, oh, well, I got a hunch, or I got it off Instagram, or I saw it on TikTok, or I know for a fact. Well, how do you know for a fact? And then more often people told me, because so-and-so told me, then you don't know for a fact. If you didn't talk to the source, then you don't know something for a fact. So I don't respect everyone's opinion.
But
I have no desire to engage.
Their latest podcast episode, they titled it The Joe Budden Podcast and the Dumbing Down of America. Can you believe that? Right from the jump, they accused Joe and his co-host of imitating their oppressors, painting the whole show as toxic and lowbrow. This feud is getting ugly fast, and Joe might be facing one of his biggest media storms yet. The whole dynamic between Mark Lamont Hill and Queen's Flip isn't one-sided at all. Mark isn't the type to just sit there and take disrespect. He stands his ground. This back and forth between them has been brewing for a while, and honestly, it just looks like a straight-up miscommunication. See, Queen's Flip wasn't trying to call Mark a sucker, but Mark took it that way and snapped. From the outside, it might look like Mark lost his cool, but really, he just felt disrespected. And Flip, he was just being Flip. Animated, passionate, and maybe a little too blunt at times. He threw in that line about Mark using tricky words, which probably came from his own frustration, not real hate. These things happen when strong personalities clash. At first, Angela Rye tried to keep things professional, kind of respectful, but not really. Then she turned up the heat. She told Joe Budden and the rest of his crew that they're not invited to her platform and said they don't represent real intellects. Now that's when it really started getting spicy. I understand where those critics are coming from, but if you actually watch the Joe Budden podcast regularly, you'd see the truth. Joe and his team have shown nothing but love and respect toward Mark Lamont Hill. They've let him share knowledge, drop insight, and even teach on air. The energy between them is open, positive, and far from toxic. Mark isn't getting bullied up there, not even close. That whole he's being mistreated narrative came from people judging a short clip instead of the full story. And here's something people forget. Mark was a free agent not long ago. Out of all the networks, it was Joe Budden's podcast that gave him a platform and a serious paycheck. CNN didn't call, MSNBC didn't call, Joe did. So how can folks turn around and bash the same man who gave Mark a major opportunity? If you weren't willing to put Mark on your team, how can you critique the one who actually did? That's wild. Clearly, Joe values Mark. He's literally paying him 6 figures to share his voice and perspective. That doesn't scream hate, that screams respect. But then Tiffany Cross jumped in and took it to another level. She flat out said she has no interest in hearing opinions from people like Queen's Flip, completely dismissing him and what he brings to the table. That's where this debate stopped being about intellect and started looking a lot more like ego. Now this is where the drama really heats up. Tiffany Cross went on her own platform and started throwing shade at the Joe Budden crew, claiming their whole style lacks structure and depth. She said it's just men yelling into microphones, totally dismissing what the show stands for. But fans instantly fired back, saying that that's exactly why they love the podcast. It's raw, real, and unfiltered. Joe's supporters pointed out that the show mixes humor, intellect, and street-level honesty in a way TV networks never could. And that's the thing. People tune in because they relate to the authenticity, not because they want perfect grammar or political polish. Tiffany didn't stop there, though. She accused Joe of platforming ignorance and said people like Queen's Flip don't represent Black excellence. That's when the internet went wild. Social media split in half, one side defending Joe as a pioneer of independent Black media, and the other saying the show was bringing down the culture. It's turning into a full-on class war between corporate media and the streets, and Joe's name is right in the middle of it. Joe Budden eventually caught wind of everything and addressed it on his show, and he didn't hold back. He said, "Ain't nobody gonna tell me how to run my platform," and made it clear he wasn't apologizing for how they do things. Joe told his audience that the show isn't supposed to be CNN. It's supposed to be real conversation. He even laughed about how people only saw one clip and tried to cancel him off context. The energy in the room was tense but confident. Queen's Flip doubled down too, saying he'll never change how he talks or acts just to make elitist people comfortable. Mark Lamont Hill stayed quiet that episode, but you could see he was uncomfortable being in the middle of both sides. Joe's tone made it clear. They're not backing down, and they won't let anyone label them as ignorant for having raw, honest discussions that millions enjoy every week. Behind the scenes, insiders say Joe and Mark actually had a private meeting to smooth things over. Sources close to the show claim Joe reminded Mark that no matter how heated things get, it's all love, and that their debates make the podcast special. Apparently, Mark agreed, but felt the outside criticism made him look bad in his academic circles. He's built a career off professionalism, and now folks were calling him too street for associating with Joe's crew. That tension reportedly made Joe furious. Not at Mark, but at the idea that people thought they could shame someone for working with him. Joe's always fought against gatekeeping in Black media, and this situation just gave him another reason to call it out. People forget, Joe built his empire from scratch, without corporate backing, without media handouts. And now, those same media insiders are trying to dictate who's intellectual enough to sit at the table. Joe wasn't having it, not one bit. After the meeting, the next episode dropped, and fans immediately noticed the vibe was different. Joe tried to keep it light, but Queen's Flip came in hot, defending himself and throwing subtle jabs at Tiffany Cross. He said, "You can't call yourself a voice of the people if you keep looking down on the people." That line blew up online. It was quoted all over social media, with fans praising Flip for speaking up. But that also brought more backlash. Tiffany's supporters accused Joe's camp of turning it into a gender war, saying men were trying to silence educated Black women. The debate kept evolving. Now, it wasn't just about intellect, but about who gets to define what Black media should look like. Each side claimed they were uplifting the culture, but the division kept growing, and Joe's podcast found itself under the biggest microscope it's faced in years. Meanwhile, other media figures started picking sides. Charlamagne the God and DJ Envy discussed the situation on The Breakfast Club, and Charlamagne said, "Joe's just doing what Joe's always done, challenge the system." That comment went viral too. He called out the hypocrisy of corporate media personalities acting like they're better than creators who built their audience without help. That added more fuel to the fire. Some fans started seeing the feud as bigger than just Joe versus Tiffany. It became about independence versus institution, street knowledge versus formal education, and Joe, always one to lean into controversy, hinted that this whole saga just proves his point, that independent voices scare people who rely on networks for power. Whether you like him or not, Joe Budden turned a messy argument into a conversation about who controls Black storytelling in the digital era. But then things got personal. Screenshots started circulating showing old tweets from Tiffany Cross where she praised Joe Budden back in the day, calling him one of the sharpest thinkers in hip-hop media. Fans dug those up instantly, saying her new criticism looked hypocritical. Tiffany fired back, saying she used to respect Joe before he turned his platform into chaos. Joe's crew laughed it off, with Queen's Flip joking on air that they only hate you when you stop playing their game. That line hit hard. The whole internet caught on. Memes, clips, edits. The story was everywhere. What started as a podcast debate had now turned into a full cultural battle about authenticity, respectability, and who really speaks for the people. At this point, even casual viewers who never watched Joe's podcast were tuned in. The drama had taken over timelines, and everyone had an opinion. Some said Joe's energy was necessary, that he's giving a platform to voices mainstream media ignores. Others said the show had crossed a line and needed to elevate the conversation. speculation, but the numbers don't lie. Joe's viewership went up, subscribers jumped, and clips from the show were trending every day. Insiders said Joe was secretly amused by it all. Controversy has always fueled his career, and this was no different. But what makes this story wild is that even through the chaos, the chemistry between Joe, Mark, and Queen's Flip stayed intact. They still laughed, debated, and argued like brothers. No matter how loud the outside noise got, the Joe Budden podcast stayed right where it's always been. Messy, passionate, unpredictable, and completely unfiltered. Then, out of nowhere, a new twist hit the timeline. Angela Rye went live on Instagram and doubled down on everything she said. She told her audience that Joe Budden's platform glorifies chaos and that grown men arguing doesn't equal culture. But fans weren't buying it. Comment sections were filled with people calling her out for acting like corporate media is above entertainment when half of those networks profit off drama too. Angela looked visibly frustrated as she tried to explain that her issue wasn't with Joe personally, but with what she called the normalization of ignorance. Still, her words came off harsh, and people said she sounded like she was trying to gatekeep who gets to represent Black culture on big platforms. Joe didn't take long to respond. He came on the next podcast episode with that signature smirk and said, "If talking real makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're not as real as you think." The studio burst out laughing, but Joe's tone carried weight. He broke it down saying people confuse unfiltered with ignorant, and that being passionate doesn't mean you lack intellect. Fans loved it. They felt Joe finally said what everyone's been thinking about, how mainstream spaces silence voices that don't sound polished or politically safe. Mark Lamont Hill tried to play peacemaker, saying he respects both sides, the academic world and the street world, but admitted that sometimes those two sides just don't understand each other. It was one of the most honest moments of the whole saga, showing that this wasn't just internet beef, it was a clash of two completely different worlds trying to claim ownership of the culture. Then came another bombshell. Leaked DMs surfaced, showing that a few journalists were planning to write think pieces on Joe Budden's show, calling it toxic entertainment. People online accused them of trying to orchestrate a takedown. Screenshots went viral, and it looked like certain figures in the media were teaming up to discredit Joe's brand. Fans started defending him even harder, flooding timelines with hashtag #StandWithJoe posts and tagging the journalists for fake activism. It turned into a war between independent content creators and traditional journalists. Some creators even made videos breaking down how corporate networks manipulate narratives, using Joe's situation as proof. The more people tried to cancel Joe, the bigger his fan base grew. Like every hit piece only made him stronger. Things reached a new level when Joe got invited to appear on The Breakfast Club to speak his side. The episode instantly went viral before it even dropped. Joe came in calm but confident, saying, "We built something from nothing, and the same people who ignored us then are mad we don't need them now." That line had the internet shaking. Charlamagne nodded in agreement, saying that whether people love or hate Joe, his success changed podcasting forever. It was one of Joe's most mature interviews yet. He didn't shout or argue. He just laid out the truth, that independence comes with enemies. And for once, even his critics had to admit, Joe Budden wasn't just surviving controversy, he was rewriting the rules on how to win without the system. But even after all that, the story didn't die down. It got even crazier. Tiffany Cross posted a cryptic tweet saying, "When the dust settles, truth always wins," hinting that she wasn't done yet. People immediately started speculating about a possible expose or another segment targeting Joe's show. Meanwhile, Joe seemed completely unfazed. On the next episode, he joked about the drama, saying, "They can write all they want. I'll just give them more to write about." The comment section blew up with fans calling him the villain of media, and Joe embraced it. Instead of hiding, he leaned into the controversy like it was part of his brand. What's wild is that even with all the smoke, the chemistry on his show never wavered. Mark and Queen's Flip were still going back and forth, laughing one minute, debating the next. The chaos became the content, and somehow that's exactly what kept people watching every single week. Then, the situation took another turn when an insider from a major streaming network claimed that certain producers were blacklisting Joe's podcast from potential sponsorship deals because of the ongoing controversy. Screenshots started circulating, showing internal emails where executives debated whether Joe's content was brand safe. That lit social media on fire. Fans accused the networks of hypocrisy, saying they tolerate plenty of messy reality TV, but want to silence independent voices when they speak their truth. Joe addressed the issue indirectly, saying, "You can't cancel what you didn't create," which became one of the most quoted lines of the week. It became bigger than gossip. People started calling it a freedom of speech issue. Other podcasters jumped in, backing Joe and saying that big corporations were trying to control what kind of conversations Black creators are allowed to have. Joe's situation turned into a rallying point for independent media everywhere, proving that controversy couldn't stop a platform built on authenticity. Just when everyone thought things were calming down, Angela Rye went on The View and mentioned Joe's name again, saying, "We can't confuse loudness for leadership." The audience clapped, but online the reaction was instant. Clips flooded Twitter with fans accusing her of using Joe's name for ratings. Joe's supporters argued that every time his name comes up, numbers go up, meaning even his critics benefit from the chaos. Meanwhile, back on the Joe Budden podcast, the crew laughed it off again with Queen's Flip saying, "They talk about us more than their own guests." It was pure entertainment, the kind of back and forth that keeps the internet glued to every new clip. By now, it wasn't just about Joe or Tiffany or Angela. It was about how independent creators were shaking up a media world that's been untouchable for decades. And whether people agreed with Joe or not, one thing was undeniable. Everyone was talking about him. Joe Budden fired back hard, and he didn't hold back even a little. In his response, he brought up an old term from his feud with Charlamagne the God, Charmites. If you don't know, that's what Joe used to call the folks who orbit around Charlamagne's media circle. People who pop up on The Breakfast Club or brilliant idiots from time to time, always ready to back Charlamagne no matter what. And according to Joe, Angela Rye fits right into that category. So when Joe hears Angela coming at him now, he doesn't take it as genuine criticism. He sees it as her riding for Charlamagne's side. From Joe's point of view, she's only talking because of that old rivalry. That's why Joe didn't hesitate to sun her publicly, calmly letting her know that her disinvitation meant nothing to him. He said straight up that he'd never want to share a platform with her anyway, calling himself too accomplished to even consider it. And what's wild is, Joe's audience completely backed him. They flooded the comments saying he's earned the right to defend his name however he wants. Joe reminded everyone that he's self-made, and no critic or gatekeeper can take that away. If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment. Let us know whose side you're on in this crazy media showdown.